Hello everyone, thank you for joining. Today we are running another Champions Lunch with Fleet Planner, and I'm joined with Alpa, who is a business growth expert, and Robert, who is also a business development manager. And today we're just going to be discussing different ways that you can grow your business, particularly as small businesses in the transport industry. And Robert will be talking a bit about how you can use grants to do that. And Alpa will be talking about, strategies that you can implement within your company to help develop it and help it grow. So without further ado, I've got some questions for both of you, but for the first one, Alpa, I was going to ask if you could just give people watching a rough idea of what kind of small businesses you encounter when you go to help them grow. What kind of shape are they in? And how do you then help them to see what things and measures they need to have in place to develop and grow within the industry?
Okay, so within the SME sector, there's 5.6 million businesses in the UK that are between 0 to 9 employees. And they really are, I think, the backbone of the British economy. The quicker they grow, the more the local economies are fueled. Now, when I walk into a business of that size, 9 times out of 10, there's a couple of things which I encounter. First of all, there's a bottleneck. The bottleneck is always the business owner, because they've got everything in their head. They've probably got a few people that are working for them, but they never really tell them what they want, where they want to go. They've kind of got to where they've got to by sheer luck, good contacts, and then they get to a point where they just can't break that glass ceiling. So my job is to then work with them, and predominantly I work with the business owner initially to really get them to understand where their time is valuable, how they align their thought process so it helps their staff to maybe do more of the work, and for them to stop being the bottleneck. So that's predominantly one of the things that I focus on, because there's a lot of internal change that a business owner of that size needs to go to, because everyone says, oh, I'm going to be 1 million, or I'm going to be 5 million, but there's a journey you have to take to get to that point. And that's often not just a change in the business, but it's a change in the owner's internal thought process and how they go about building that. And that's perhaps the biggest change. So anyone with a small business is trying to get to their first million, that is when the biggest change occurs. Getting from 1 million to 5 to 10 then becomes relatively easy, because you've learnt those foundation skills.
That's a good point. There was something that we discussed actually before this call that I was going to say as well, which, based on what you were saying, is sometimes in small companies, defining what success is actually a very important way of dictating how you can then grow your business. How would you kind of say, and for Robert as well, would you define what helps people in small businesses to know what success is, and maybe not to aim for just the 5 million or the 10 million, but to kind of find smaller successful goals to have within the organization that will help you to then grow further? What would you suggest people do in terms of that?
Well, I would say, from my perspective, the important thing of being able to, you need to be able to have fairly good data systems in order to manage the business. If you don't know what's going on, then you can lose a lot of money and waste a lot of time extremely quickly. And one of the challenges, particularly, there are more different ways of recording data and capturing data now. It's a question of trying to work out which data is relevant, which data is related to other types of data. And so you can focus on those, if you like, separating the wheat from the chaff. The data that's going to have a big is going to have a big impact on your ability to run your business and grow, and you can just almost sort of disregard the stuff that doesn't.
Certainly, yeah.
And certainly what Robert said there is interesting. So data, when you talk about data, people think of data as maybe a database or contacts, but data is anything that's to do with your business, financial data, not just your contact data, but data you might have on specific customer behaviors. Those are the sorts of things which we're also talking about. And I think fundamentally for me, when I work with a business, I want them to work in, they might have an overall business plan, but really to work in short sprints. So say, right, over this next 90 days, we're going to work on these things, and we'll know success looks like when we've achieved X. And that could be either a goal that's monetized, it could be a number of customers acquired, it's got to be something tangible so that the whole team can fall behind that goal and actually push to achieve it. So I think for me, success has to be small wins that they see quickly, which then give them the knowledge and the expertise perhaps to say, right, when we go for something bigger, it's going to take longer. I'll give you an example. You send out one email and then you sit back and you wait for the phone to ring. Well, that's not. But if you do an email and you then do some blog posts and you do some other things, you're then looking at each of those successes. We've got the first email out, that's a success. That's a tangible bit of the project we've done. The next bit and the next bit. And then at the end, you then measure and you say, actually, did we achieve it? Were we successful? Whereas I think people don't give it enough time for things to be measured, and they don't do enough of the basics to actually achieve that success. So that's one of the things which I definitely say businesses need to do, is small, short, sharp.
Yeah. So data, based on what we've just kind of said then, data can help guide and govern what success means and how to get those tangible, develop those different tangible goals within a company. And if you can manage and monitor and analyze the data within your company, then it's going to have a much more meaningful effect on helping to grow your small business as well. Robert, you work within the kind of grant industry. I know that one of the grants that you work on is actually to do with data. I was wondering if maybe you could talk to some of our watchers about that grant and how it can help you grow your business.
Okay. Now, we've got a grant program called TAIL, which stands an acronym. Everybody has acronyms these days, called Transport and Logistics Efficiencies. And it's basically a 40% funded grant of between £1,000 and £10,000 to actually help businesses use data more effective in the logistics process. Now, it doesn't have to be a logistics company that we work with. It could be a company for whom the delivery of products or the delivery of physical services, such as technicians with the right tools and spare parts, a process that needs to be managed as part of the company's service offer. So even if you are managing outsourced service providers as part of your business offer, there may still be a need for you to have a system that you can integrate with your suppliers. And so that's how the grant effectively works. I mean, we've supported companies in some levels for basically to subsidise the cost of a consultant to actually go into their business and see how they're using data and how that could be used more, how they could structure something to make things more efficient. A worrying number of companies are still using the old pencil and paper type data. A few have graduated to Excel spreadsheets, but increasingly with compliance, with knowledge about the customer, with reducing the cost to serve, all the operating efficiencies. We're coming on now to environmental reporting standards, which are becoming more and more to the fore. There's a lot of data out there. There are a lot of people who can actually help them use the data or software, and that's what IConstruct can do, virtually from having a off-the-shelf package being tailored and adapted to an individual client's needs. Some people may need GPS tagging for tracking vehicles and service technicians out in the field to manage client expectations. And some people just want a basic warehouse management system. And we've funded all those particular projects.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I think that's a really good opportunity for small businesses to use that grant to really help themselves grow. Just as a note for people watching as well, the grant that Robert's been talking about, the deadline for applications is the 30th of April. So there is still time if you are considering getting this kind of grant. Then you can send a application online and then potentially get that grant and spend it.
Yeah.
In
You've
terms
got
of
to have spent it by the end of July. That's why you've got 3 months. So we get it approved by the end of July. Sorry, get it approved by end of April, and then you can you've got 3 months to spend it and claim the funding back. Otherwise, you give it
exactly,
back to the government. Yeah.
perfect. Don't want to waste that, people.
No.
If there's the opportunity, take it.
I think I'm often approached by small businesses and they say, well, we need funding, and they only ever look at VC funding, private equity funding, or they're looking at debt finance. And whilst those things are brilliant, they're very time consuming and often lead to nowhere because these smaller businesses just don't have that infrastructure. For me, it's a no-brainer to fill out a grant application. It's not affecting, you're the equity in your company, you're not debt financing, you've got the chance to use some of this money to help grow the business. So I'm all for grants, and I think what you're doing, Robert, is fantastic in that sense. And I think the more companies we can help, particularly as we come out of this pandemic, the quicker we're all going to experience that recovery, which I think is coming.
Yeah. What would you, both of you, actually, on this one, I was going to say, what would you say to people watching today who look at the process of acquiring a grant, or looking at their business and seeing that there's so much things that they need to do in order to grow and they don't know where to start? What advice would you give to them about the grant process? Like, what kind of reassurance can you give them that in terms of how they can get it? And what advice would you give, Alpa, to groups or companies that are daunted by what lies ahead, especially in this time, with what they need to do in order to get to the next successful stage within their company? Alpa, would you like to start?
Okay. So one of the things I'd say is really it's to have a proper strategic plan. It's not, I'm not talking about a business plan. I'm talking about a proper strategic plan to say, okay, where are we now? And where do we want to get to? And obviously we've talked about what success looks like. And I think it's equally important for them to then say, right, we're going to pick a handful of things. You can't do everything. So say, okay, if we're going to target increasing our sales, then the first thing you have to do is you have to look at, okay, who are your existing customers? Is there a pattern? How did they buy from us in the first place? Because if they bought, obviously you've got a tried and tested model because you've got customers. So what did you do then? And then I'll probably repeat what worked, because actually that probably hasn't changed in the last 6 months or so that you've implemented it. I would say to any business that's daunted by growth that it is a scary journey. Absolutely, and it's okay to be a bit daunted, because you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, and there's risk. There's always risk. You grow your business, you could fall flat on your face. But the key thing for me with any business owner that's daunted is it doesn't matter. You fail your way to success sometimes, because even when something doesn't go right, if you step back and look at that and say, well, what did I learn from this? What would I do differently next time? That is a very powerful way of not allowing the fear of success or the fear of failure hold you back. There's always outcomes, good or bad, that you learn, and the quicker you learn them and apply them, the less you'll make those same mistakes and the more you'll experience success.
Definitely, I think that's a really good point to make in a time like this as well. Yes. People might be a bit worried about trying to grow their business with the pandemic, but as I mentioned, which I would like Robert to add to that, is there are ways that you can still grow your business that are available to you through the government, like the different grants. And what would you say, Robert, to people who reluctant to apply for a grant, or the tail grant, for example?
Well, I mean, I think we've got a few cases in point. For example, Alpa mentioned the importance of, being able to have a degree of strategic plan. What we found as a result of the pandemic is a number of people have actually pivoted their strategic plans, the plans that they were in the process of implementing in the first 3 months of 2020. A number of cases have either been substantially rewritten or ripped up and started again. So, for example, we've had companies where we've originally started, where we'd already awarded a grant, but they hadn't began to spend the money. And so they'd put plans on hold, and then they've actually said, well, we've had a bit of a rethink now, and what we originally wanted the grant for, we don't want it anymore. But there is another area we would like to repivot our business to. Perhaps we're doing more online, whereas previously they'd been delivering more to business customers via traditional transport methods. And so they've now reapplied, or we've had to fill in what's called a project change request, because that's what the government requires us to do. But they've got a different grant to do other things. We've also had people who've realised that perhaps they needed a grant to license a particular type of software for a number of users. They don't need quite so many users, so they said, well, actually, we don't need as much grant as we thought we needed. So we're going along with that. So I think that is one of the reasons why we've got slightly more grant available than we thought we would have this close to the end of the project, which is a good thing, because we don't want people, spending money on projects that are not that aren't going to benefit their own business, because they still have to have a contribute a match funded element of that grant, and if it's not going to help the business, then it's money wasted. So we just need to be agile in the way that we deliver the support. I mean, for the early stage grants that we offer, what we call the tail light, we can actually get application turned around in just over a week. So if and that would be, for example, so if somebody wanted a grant of up to, say, £1,500 for a £5,000 project, perhaps to hire a consultant to go in and go through their data structure, then that's something that we can fund quite quickly.
So that's actually quite a good piece of advice there for people who, as we were saying, might be daunted by the process. Actually, it can be quite quick in that part as well. So on in that note as well, Robert, there is one other grant that you work on. It's the IConstruct grant.
Yes, we're not pushing that quite so. We're not pushing that quite so hard, because we've got until the end of December next year to get rid of that. But basically, IConstruct works on similar principles, but it's predominantly aimed at SMEs in the construction sector. So we say construction in its wider sense. It could include logistics providers to the construction sector, or other service providers to the construction sector, or manufacturers of components or minerals which are used in the construction sector, which is a wider program. It's not purely grant. It includes elements of business support and mentoring as well. And in fact, we've got a website, www.iconstruct.org.uk, where you can actually go and see we're organising various webinars, different elements of construction. We've got people like Meet the Buyer, how SMEs can get involved in the Sizewell C supply chain, which a lot of people might think, well, why do people like EDF, who are a massive company, want to get SMEs involved? And the answer is because they're going to make such a they're going to make such an economic contribution. The politicians want to see that some of that expenditure is actually going to be supporting local communities, and that's why they need to have small and medium-sized businesses locally supporting it. Although there's a job of work to be done to make sure the SMEs are able to, have the skills that are necessary to build nuclear power stations. So it's quite an interesting project. But in terms of the support and the intervention, we can support a grant up to £20,000 for IConstruct.
Wow.
which again with a 30% intervention rate. So the company pays 70%, we'll pay 30% of the cost towards it. And it could even, we're even at the moment looking at supporting the costs of hiring a building information modelling for a particular construction firm who needs somebody who knows how buildings are designed and operate using software that the government has mandated for all public sector construction projects, and a number of private sector construction projects are already using it as well. So it's it's an element of future proofing as well, trying to encourage companies to become more efficient.
Yeah, that's a really good way, and another accessible grant for people working in the construction industry. So people watching who are a small business and you're in the construction industry, that is something that also there is a bit more time for you to apply to, as Robert mentioned as well. So I was going to ask Alpa and actually Robert another question that I think is just a good one for people who might be watching this video who want to take some immediate kind of advice from managers and experts within their field. What is one of the biggest pitfalls or failures that you always see when you've got someone coming for a grant who's been doing something wrong, or someone who's hired you to help grow the business, and you look back on what they've been doing and you think, okay, so that was one of the biggest pitfalls or the most repetitive failure that I've seen within small companies that maybe hinder them from moving forward in terms of growing?
I think for me it's quite simple. It's not listening. I think I don't know what Robert thinks on that, but I find when I walk into a business, they want the help, but they also don't want to hear what they need to hear. So there's an element of I know you're right, but I don't want to hear. So they've got the cotton wool in their ears, but but they know that they need to do it. I think the quicker a business owner, particularly if you're hiring a consultant, you're hiring the consultant to recognise that you need some help. So when you have that consultant in, it's very important that you listen, and they will tell you things that you don't want to hear. They'll tell you things that you need to hear, and they'll make you, well, you can't make anybody, but they'll recommend that you make these changes to help in your business. And I think I often say to my clients, it's okay for you to disagree with me, but you have to give me a commercially viable argument as to why what I'm suggesting isn't going to work. You can't just say, I don't like it, because that also goes back to your earlier question about comfort zone, fear of success, fear of failure. And sometimes they're not sure, whether they can, they can do that. So for me, it's not listening. And I think it's also taking on too many things and therefore being spread too thin, because you can't be good at everything. So you need to laser focus in on specifics and slow it down a little bit, because slowing it down a little bit is not a bad thing. I think those are the things. I don't know if, Robert, you'd agree with any of those.
I'd certainly agree with that. I mean, I think the good thing about, from our experience with grants is if a senior management of the company recognises that they've got a problem, then we're part of the way there. Sometimes when senior management have gotten their own preconceived ideas as to how the problem can be solved, and a number of them will be solved exactly when they take the grant limit to the maximum the grant can be spent for. That's when we start having, I think, a challenge, and that's one of the reasons why we have the tail light program, so that we can actually, part fund a consultant. We work with a number of specialist logistics software systems consultants that we can recommend, but they don't have to use one of our panel if they know or can find an alternative to actually go in and give them some guidance and advice. I mean, with the IConstruct project, that's slightly different, because we offer for certain companies actual mentored support, where we have a number of mentors who've worked in the industry. Some have worked with family-owned construction firms. Some have worked with the major blue chip corporate construction firms, so they know what the big companies are looking for. We've had companies who've managed family growth, family construction firms, and got them to a stage where they can be sold for a trade sale or a flotation. So they've if you like Alpa, they've got the battle scars. But some of the SMEs that we deal with actually say, oh, well, we're getting 9 hours free consultancy. Mr. Expert or Ms. Expert is going to come along, tell us what we need to do in 9 hours, and thank you very much. I'll write us a report and all is good. But it's not the case. I mean, the way we've structured the mentoring is actually that the company still needs to do some thinking. The mentor comes along and stimulates thought, because at the end of the day, we want the company to own the direction of travel they're going in. And the mentor should be there, if you like, as a sounding board and a signposter, but no more than that. And I think, as Alpa says, attitude and approach is, you're a big part of the distance way. If you know things have got to change, but you're not sure how, then I think we're, quite advanced on that one.
Yeah, no, I think so. Based on just to overview on what you've both said, I think being pragmatic in times like this, indeed, and flexible to hearing different pieces of advice than what you would have thought as the solution to a problem within your business is one of the key things in terms of going from a small company it reached a stalemate in terms of growing, and a company that is very ready to then grow. And on top of that, with what Robert's saying, taking on grants or applying for grants like TAIL are fantastic for the additional mentoring and advice that you get from the experts or consultants that come on to do that additional work to help your business grow. And if that's something that you were unsure about, certainly something to consider in terms of looking to grow your business in times like these. We've actually got a question, which I'm just going to show you on here, and I thought maybe perhaps one of you might know the answer. But anyway, yeah, just to see if we've got a question. So we've got, are there any grants to train new drivers in the transport industry? Are we aware of any of these? If not,
I'm not aware of any grants for training new HGV drivers. As you're aware, there is a big shortage of them at the moment, and I can't see it getting easier. So I would say watch this space. I think eventually the government may realise that it might have to make the accreditation process a lot easier than it has been in the past, particularly as you can't recruit from the EU now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Robert's saying there. I think there isn't anything available that I know of, but I'm not the expert when it comes to grants. That's Robert's bag, so I'll defer to him on this one.
I think the same person has just asked about coach drivers, but is the answer remain the same for this, or does it?
Yeah, that's the same. I mean, it's a slightly different test they've got to take, but yeah, that's the same process.
Okay, so then, sorry, I think there was a delay there. So in terms of coming back to kind of conclude on how to grow your business, there was one other thing that I thought I'd ask Robert with regards to the grant. I know that's a big thing, and Alpa coming in as we've kind of seen with the TAIL grants as a business growth expert is a really key way in growing. But what could you touch briefly on some of the requirements or things that you might need to have in place to apply for a grant like TAIL or the IConstruct grant for those who may be interested after watching this?
Well, as far as TAIL is concerned, the only requirement is that you must be an SME, which I imagine as Alpa mentioned, a vast number of British companies are. employ less than 250 people. You've got a balance sheet total of less than, I think, about £43 million, and your turnover is, I think, about something like €50 million, which last time I looked was about £44 million. So it's not. So the vast majority of British companies are going to be eligible for that. Obviously, you can't be owned by a company that is larger than that number, or you can't be part of a group of other companies that, when you add them all together, are larger than that. So that is effectively the only criteria, and obviously it's more based on use. So whether you operate, so for Tail, it's either in the logistics industry itself, or a company that uses logistics quite heavily as part of its service or product offering to its customers. And then for Tail, it's for IConstruct, it's being an SME again, operating either providing construction services or components or services to the construction sector. So it's reasonably broad.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And then one other question that I had for Alpa. I'm not sure what you'll think of this, but I thought it's a good question to ask. Perhaps some people who are struggling as an SME might be considering this, and maybe it'd be good to get some advice from you. But what would you say to those who'd be looking into selling shares or putting that part of their business as an SME on the market? In terms of business growth, would that be something that you suggest to people as something to do? And if not, why, and what would you suggest they do instead?
Okay, so when we're talking about shares or share options, there are a couple of things which I would definitely sort of think are red flags for an SME. If you're an SME and you are looking to sell shares to gain more working capital, then I wouldn't recommend it. I'd go that it's much easier to hold on to your equity because it's of value, and do as Robert's suggesting and get some grant funding. Where I think share options are really interesting are when you have key members of staff that you don't necessarily want to lose. At that point, you can offer share options, and you should talk to your accountant or to someone on how to go about that for your business. But I'd say a couple of caveats is that you have a strong shareholders agreement so that you're protecting your interests. If the employee leaves, then the shares should revert back to the business. It's a way to reward. Those are the sorts of things which I'd recommend. But if you're an SME, at this point, I would focus purely on increasing profits and sales and growing, because those types of things are much better off being looked at when you're a slightly bigger company. And by that, I'm talking about multiple millions upwards. At that point, you can then look at stuff, because to just sell shares or to lose equity unnecessarily is not something I would advise any business owner to do. And certainly, if you have shareholders, multiple directors in a business that each have equal shares, again, a shareholders agreement is perhaps one of the most important things that you probably need as directors. That is in the event that if two directors are not happy and the infighting starts, if that agreement is your go-to agreement on how you deal with disputes. If a shareholder is incapacitated or dies, what happens to their shares? Does it revert to the director's partner? How does that affect the day-to-day running of the business? And when we're talking about shares, selling of shares is something I would never agree to when a small business, but certainly shares shared between multiple directors, you do need a robust shareholders agreement. And if you're giving shares to staff to motivate them, then definitely make sure you have the option that they revert back upon that employee leaving the company.
Perfect. Thank you for that. That will be very helpful, I think, to a lot of people. So thank you for both of you for joining me today on talking about that. Was there any final points that you both wanted to make in terms of leaving the conversation before the people watching with how to grow your business, before we leave it at that? And if while we're talking anyone has any other questions, then feel free to drop them in, and I can pop them on the screen and we can discuss that just before we wrap this Champions Lunch up and get back to work.
I would just like to highlight that you shouldn't see grants as an end in themselves. As we've been discussing earlier, you should see them as an enabling tool that can actually help you do more or do something faster that you already want to do. But it's actually a waste of, I've seen companies do it, not been involved in it myself, but the number of companies that are actually applying for grants for the sake of applying for grants and then end up with a lot of disjointed funding for, things that don't really fit the overall strategy. So just take time and think about, where you want to go. And if a grant can help you get there quicker, great.
And I would add on to what Robert said there, very much on the same page with Robert. I would say failure to plan is planning to fail. That is quite true. So you can't know what grants you need if you don't know what direction you're traveling. You can't travel north and south at the same time. So pick a direction, commit to it. And then once you know what your strategy looks like and what you're going to do on a day-to-day basis, then that's a good time to step back and say, are the grants available? Because then the grants are used in the right way, and you're getting the best out of them. And the mentors and people that will be helicoptered in to help you, they are able to help you because you've planned all of that out. And you don't need to know all the answers. I'm not expecting an encyclopedia, but at least have an idea of what your main key goals are.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for joining me today. I hope that people watching this video have found it helpful. And if you do have any further questions, then you've got our names, and Fleet Planner would be more than happy to discuss that with you and put you forward to different people. Next week, in a couple of weeks' time, we will be back again for another Champions Lunch to discuss a different topic. And if you did enjoy this video and you are interested in watching every 2 weeks, then feel free to subscribe to our channel as well. Thanks for joining. It was lovely meeting you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.